One of the biggest financial decisions that you will ever make is whether to rent or to buy your home. And in Hawaii, where the median single-family home costs over $1 million and it's gonna need significant work and maintenance, that decision is gonna carry more weight than almost anywhere else in the entire world. Most people make this decision off of what their parents did, what their friends are doing, what feels like the most logical next step. Very few people make it with a deep understanding of what they're actually getting into, what it will truly cost, and whether it actually supports the life that they are trying to build. And here's something worth understanding before even getting into this conversation. Every realtor, every lender involved in a home purchase gets paid when you buy. Not when you make the right decision, not when the purchase works out for you, but when you buy. But it does mean that nobody in that transaction is getting paid to tell you to wait, or to rent instead, or to think harder before you sign. That voice has to come from somewhere else. So today, I wanna be that voice of reason before a major financial decision. I am not here to talk you out of buying. I am not here to tell you that renting is always better. I'm here to give you the full picture that most people never get before they sign. My name is Ethan Ho. I'm a certified financial planner and the founder of Claw Capital Partners here in Hawaii. I have spent over a decade helping high earners and families navigating major financial changes and decisions here in Hawaii. And I also have personal skin in this topic. I made this decision myself when I was 25 years old on my birthday. And I'll tell you exactly how that all played out in a few minutes. Before we dive in, if you find this content useful for you, please subscribe so you can follow along. I do my best to put out Hawaii-specific financial planning content regularly, and I try to make it worth your time. So let's get into it. So before getting into the numbers, I want to acknowledge something real, that home ownership here in Hawaii is deeply embedded in the culture. For many local families, owning land is about roots, belonging, honoring what previous generations sacrificed to build. That meaning is real, it's beautiful, and it deserves respect. And it can also make it harder to separate the emotional weight of ownership from the financial decision that deserves its own clear examination. And because home ownership is so culturally praised here, and because most people are not deeply financially literate, the default consensus becomes simple. Buying is good, renting means you're throwing money away, and owning means you've made it. That consensus is not entirely wrong, but it is not the full picture. And for someone who is trying to build real, lasting wealth in one of the most expensive places to live, making a $1 million decision based on cultural census alone is a risk worth examining. Let me make the honest case for buying first, because there is one and it deserves full acknowledgement. First is that a fixed rate mortgage locks in your housing payment for 30 years. Rent doesn't stay flat, it goes up over time, but the mortgage payment, it doesn't. That inflation protection is real and becomes more valuable every single year that you hold it. Second is leverage. When you buy a $1.1 million home with $220,000 down, you control the full asset with only 20% of the capital. If that home appreciates, you benefit on the full value, not just the down payment. That is how leverage builds wealth. Third is forced savings. That mortgage builds equity every single month, whether you think about it or not. For someone who would otherwise spend the difference between renting and owning, that mortgage is a discipline mechanism. It works because it's not optional. Fourth, and I think this one matters more than any spreadsheet. If you love the home, it's where you want to raise your family, where you want to host people you love, and build memories that don't have a price tag. That has real value. Priceless value sometimes. And sometimes buying is not the best financial move, but it is the best family move. Both of those things can be true at the same time. I think buying makes the most sense when the numbers work, when the reserves are intact, and when the why is honest and clear. The problem is most people never fully examine that last part. And before I get into the hard truths, let me address two things that you have probably heard or felt around why buying is always the right move. First is ownership. People like to own things and that feeling is real. But here is something worth considering. When you invest into something like a diversified index fund, you own pieces of hundreds of companies. Apple, Microsoft, every major business in the American economy. You still own things, but they're liquid things, they're diversified things, and things that don't call you when the roof leaks. Second is the mortgage interest deduction. Yes, it exists. Yes, it is real, but it is capped at $750,000 of mortgage debt, and it only benefits you if you itemize deductions rather than taking the standard deduction. For most buyers, that annual tax savings is significantly smaller than most people imagine. It is a benefit, not a strategy. So here's where most buying decisions go wrong. People will look at the mortgage payment and think that's what ownership costs. It's not even close. Let me show you the real or realistic number on a $1.1 million home with 20% down at a 5.6% interest rate, which is close to what recent Hawaii buyers have been seeing. Your principal and your interest payment is approximately $5,060 a month. Now add what most people forget. Property tax in Honolulu runs roughly $320 a month. Homeowners insurance in Hawaii, given our environmental exposure, runs roughly $250 a month. Maintenance reserves, a standard rule of thumb would be about 1% of home value per year, or roughly $917 a month. In Hawaii, with the salt air, humidity, and all the wear and tear that comes with it, that number is arguably conservative. Add those all together and your true monthly cost of home ownership is closer to $7,550 a month. Not $5,060, but $7,550. And that does not include HOA fees, where if you are in a condo or have some association, that could run $500 to $1,000 a month or more. It does not include the closing costs to get in, and when you eventually sell, sellers in Hawaii typically pay 8 to 10% of the home value in sellers' transaction costs. On a $1.1 million home, that is $88,000 to $110,000 just to exit the asset. And here's the one that nobody mentions while you are renting. When the toilet breaks, you call the landlord. When the fridge stops working, you call the landlord. When the water heater busts, you call the landlord. When you own, every one of those calls is your call. Your time, your money, and your problem to manage. In Hawaii, where labor costs more, where wait times are typically longer, that mental load is real, and it follows you for as long as you own the property. So let me tell you about a decision that I made on my 25th birthday. I bought a condo in Hawaii, and looking back, I know exactly why I did it. It showed status. I was chasing a feeling of having made it, a feeling of owning something. I held that condo for 8 years, and during that time, the home appreciated less than 3% annually. My HOA started at $560 a month, and by the time I sold, it was close to $800 a month, and a special assessment was coming. The place served me. I don't regret living there, but as a financial decision, it wasn't great. And the honest reason why I bought it really had nothing to do with the numbers. It had everything to do with what owning something made me feel. That feeling is real, it's just not a financial plan. My condo story touches on something worth understanding clearly if you are planning on buying in Hawaii. When you buy into a condo, you're not just buying your unit. You're buying into a shared financial obligation that you do not fully control. HOA fees in Hawaii have been rising steadily. Buildings age, infrastructure fails, and reserves get underfunded. A special assessment on aging Hawaii condos can be like $30,000 to $100,000 without any warning. This is not theoretical, it is happening right now on buildings across Oahu. Before buying into any building in Hawaii, look at their reserve study. Ask how funded the reserves are, ask when was the last special assessment, and ask if there's any other special assessment coming. Many buyers never ask those questions and then they find out the hard way. Here's something else that has become impossible to ignore: the environmental risks. We've recently seen flooding wash out homes entirely and fires take out entire towns. Families who have built their entire lives in those homes, either crowdfunding or having to relocate just to keep a roof over their heads. Hawaii's environmental exposure is real. Flood zones, hurricane or tsunami risks, volcanic activity on some islands, wildfires on others, and insurance, the thing that is supposed to protect you against this stuff, is becoming more expensive. And in some areas, harder to get at all. A $1.1 million home in a flood zone with rising insurance costs and real climate risks is a different asset than it was 10 years ago. That belongs in your calculation, not as a reason not to buy, but as a line item that deserves real attention. So here's something that almost nobody thinks about before they buy. What happens if life changes and you have to sell sooner than you planned? With 8 to 10% in transaction costs just to exit, you need significant appreciation just to break even. At current Hawaii prices and rates, the break even on a home purchase is likely 7 to 10 years minimum. So if your life changes in year 3 or in year 5 and you need to sell, you are potentially selling at a loss after all those years of payments. I'm actually working with someone right now who's going through exactly this. They bought because it seemed like the right move. Then they had a child and outgrew the place. They started to rent it out to cover the cost, but that rental ran negative cash flow. That financial pressure bled into everything else and eventually created consumer debt. Now they are selling to fix the cash flow problem, but after closing fees and costs, they are going to walk away with essentially nothing. After years of payment, after all the stress, after years of sacrifice, essentially nothing. Now, that's not a story about bad luck. It's a story about buying before the entire picture was clear. A payment that is barely affordable does not just stress your finances. It stresses your marriage, your parenting, your career. When your housing payment is crushing you, you can't take the career risk. You cannot start the business. You cannot take time off when your family needs you. You cannot say no to a bad job because you need the check. The house does not just cost money, it costs options. And in Hawaii, where that gap between what housing costs and what people actually earn is one of the wildest in the country, buying too much home is one of the fastest ways to trap yourself in a life that you are trying to build yourself out of. Early in the accumulation phase of your life, the one thing that's more valuable than almost anything else is optionality. The ability to follow the opportunity to move to a different island, take 6 months off when someone you love needs you, saying yes to the thing that will change your life without having to ask your mortgage if it's allowed. Buying in your early 20s or 30s locks you in ways that are easy to underestimate when you're standing at the beginning of your career. And the transaction costs means you cannot leave cheap. Every year that you rent intentionally and you invest the difference is a year of compounding that you can never get back later. I know people right now renting with a roommate in a great neighborhood paying $800 a month. That number seems modest, but if they were to invest the difference between what they are paying and what owning the same place would cost every single month, the compounding over 10 years is extraordinary. When you are young, you can live smaller, live with people, tolerate less space. Use those years. They are some of the highest leverage years of your entire financial life. So let me show you what the math looks like over time. And I want to be clear and fair up front. These are illustrative numbers. Real life is way more complex. Rates change, market moves, rents increase over time. This is not a prediction. This is a framework for thinking. Here are the assumptions. A $1.1 million home, a 20% down payment, $220,000 out of pocket at closing, mortgage at 5.6%, home appreciating at 4.8% annually, which is a reasonable long-term Hawaii estimate. Not the exceptional years, but the realistic average. Compare that to renting a comparable home for around $4,500 a month and investing the difference plus the $220,000 down payment. At 7% annually in a diversified portfolio, here are what the numbers look like. At every time horizon, the renter who actually invests the difference comes ahead. And something important to note, I use 7% as the investment return, which is a conservative long-term assumption. The S&P 500 has returned 10% annually over the last 30 years with dividends being reinvested. At the actual market return, that gap is significantly larger. I use 7% to be conservative and realistic. The actual market did better. Now, the renter scenario only works if they actually invest the difference. Most people do not. They spend it. And if that is you, the mortgage is probably a better path because it forces the discipline that most of us don't naturally have. But if you have the discipline, the math is clear. Let me show you what this looks like with a real example. A home I know well, my childhood home, was purchased in 1989 for $250,000 at a 16% interest rate. It sold in 2023 for $1.5 million. Most people hear that and think incredible investment, over $1 million in gains. But let us run the actual math. $250,000 to $1.5 million over 34 years is approximately an annual return of 5.3%. Before maintenance costs over 3 decades, before refinancing costs, before property taxes paid every year for 34 years, before insurance premiums, before capital improvements. When you factor all those in, the true annualized return drops meaningfully below that 5.3%. Now consider this, that same $250,000 invested in a diversified index fund in 1989 would have grown to approximately $4.5 million by 2023. nearly 3 times the home sale price in completely liquid assets. With no maintenance calls, no refinancing fees, no special assessments, no property taxes, the S&P 500 returned roughly 10% annually over that same period. I used 7% in my previous example to be conservative, but the actual market in this example did better. Now, was that home a bad decision? No, it was a home, it was a place, it was where life was lived. But as a pure financial investment, the math is much more complicated than the headline numbers suggest. And I think that is true to nearly every Hawaii home purchase story that people point to as the example or as the truth to why buying is always right. But that is not a fair comparison. That's like picking an individual stock that exploded and saying that picking individual stocks is better than investing in the index. But that is not how we plan, or you should plan. We plan for realistic long-term results and not the one-off outliers. So I want to share a story that captures something real about this decision here in Hawaii. I worked with someone recently who was offered the chance to buy the place that they were renting for below market value. On the surface, it looked like a clear yes, but there was more to it. He was Hawaiian. His family had settled in that town decades ago. He felt a deep cultural pull to own there, to plant his roots in the same soil his family had decades ago. That pull was real, and I respected it completely. But when we dug into the numbers, that purchase would have put enormous financial stress on his finances for the next 5 years. And when we looked honestly at the why, the itch that he wanted to scratch could actually be scratched by renting there. He could still be in that community. He could still be connected to that place. It could still be home. He chose to stay and rent, to invest the difference, to position himself to buy later when it made real financial sense. Not because the cultural connection was not real, it's because he felt a stronger pull towards not owning a home but being house poor and financially stressed than owning the deed to his place. That was his decision, made with eyes wide open, and I think it was the right decision for him. So when does buying actually make sense here in Hawaii? Here's how I think about it. First, you're planning to stay at least 7 to 10 years. You need time for appreciation to outpace the transaction cost of getting in and out. Second, that your total true housing cost, including mortgage, tax, insurance, and maintenance, should be under roughly 30% of your gross income. Not just the mortgage payment, but the true cost. Third, you should have at least 6 months of living expenses in reserves after the down payment. Not depleted to make the purchase, but intact, ready for the inevitable. Fourth, the why should be about life, roots, family, a place you genuinely love and plan to be there for a long time. Not status, not because everybody else is doing it, not because it just feels like the next step. And fifth, be honest about which decision you are making. Sometimes buying is not the best financial move, but it is the best family move. Both can be true. Just know which one is driving the decision and own it clearly. Here's the message that I want to leave you with. Do not rush into buying. When you are young, rent intentionally. Live smaller and invest the difference. Use the flexibility of those years because they are the highest leverage years of your financial life. Set yourself up so when you do buy, you buy from a position of strength. Not pressure, not fear, not because everybody else around you is. And when you do buy with eyes wide open on the full cost. The true monthly number, the break-even timeline, the HOA risk, the environmental exposure, the options that you're giving up to plant yourself in one place, and honestly, so much more that I didn't even have the chance to cover in this video. Real estate has genuinely helped to build wealth for Hawaii families for generations. This is not a video against that. It's a video for making the decision with the full picture and not just half of it. Because here's the truth that gets lost in almost every conversation about this. Security does not come from the deed, it comes from the financial resources you have and how you choose to use them. Whether you rent or you buy, it is not the home providing the security. It is the money that affords you to live in that home. So build the money, make the decision intentionally, and make the decision with eyes wide open. And if you found this useful, hit subscribe. I'm gonna continue to put out Hawaii-specific financial planning content, and I wanna make sure you see it. And if you're facing this decision right now and you want someone to help you run the real numbers, think through the real why, and figure out what actually makes sense for your real situation, that is the exact type of conversation we have regularly here at Claude Capital Partners. Head to claudecapitalpartners.com, schedule a discovery call, no pressure. Just a real conversation about one of the biggest financial decisions you will ever make. See you in the next one.